This clown makeup is next level creepy. Like, what in the discount Bozo the Clown nightmare fuel is this? Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. How? Which way to the wine? My name is Sarah, your host and part-time storyteller, full-time emotional support human. I'm gonna ruin your day with a terrible story. So if you are into chaos, crime, and concealer, you are in the right place. So make sure you subscribe, do all the YouTubey things. If you've ever watched a horror movie and thought, nah, that's too far-fetched, I've got some bad news for you. Because today's story is not fiction, it is the real crime nightmare that inspired fiction. The subject of today's story walked so Pennywise could float.
Time to float.
You see what I did there? This is the story of John Wayne Gacy. Okay, listen, before we jump into today's case, which, spoiler alert, is going to ruin clowns for you forever. If they weren't already. Let's be honest. I need to talk about what I'm going to use in today's Luke. I'm very excited. What better to use than the new Melt Welcome to Derry collection, inspired by our favorite sewer-dwelling nightmare, Pennywise the Clown.
See you in your dreams.
Because if I'm going to tell you about the real-life serial killer clown, I might as well be serving a Luke that screams trauma meets glamour. I'm talking about that red shimmer shade that's giving You'll Float to realness. I mean, this palette was made for a Crue Trime episode, am I right? So I actually picked up the whole collection. There's a white gel pot eyeliner, a beautiful red lipstick, a lip liner, and 2 really cool makeup bags. So everything will be linked down in the description box. Go check it out. Picture it, December 21st, 1978, Chicago, Illinois. There's snow on the ground, the air smells like exhaust and cold metal. Detectives from the Des Plaines Police Department were sitting outside a small ranch-style home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, watching a man who just wouldn't stop talking. The man had actually been under surveillance for over a week, ever since Robert Peast, a teenager from a local pharmacy, vanished after telling his mom that he was going to go talk to a man about a job. Detectives Joseph Kozenzak and Michael Albrecht had been following this guy day and night. They'd searched his house once already. They found some strange items, some odd smells, and a few things that didn't make sense. But now, armed with a second search warrant, they were back. And this time, they went under the house, into the crawl space. And just like that, one of the most horrific and gruesome cases in American history was unearthed. Within hours, the property outside was swarming with police. Neighbors gathered outside, clutching their coats and coffee cups. The man that they'd waved to at block parties, the guy who was dressed up as a clown at charity events, John Wayne Gacy, was being let out in handcuffs. It's actually not how he was arrested at all, but it's a great way to imagine it, right? Anyways, how did we get here? I'm glad you asked. John Wayne Gacy was born on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1942. Ironic because, luck was not this kid's thing. John was the second of 3 kids and the only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robison. John's father was a World War I veteran and a full-time bully who believed that love came in 2 forms, beer and backhands. Basically, John's dad was an asshole. John's mother was gentle and protective, the human equivalent of bubble wrap, always cushioning her son from his father's rage. His father pretty much hated him because of it. To this old school, silent generation guy, empathy was weakness, and weakness was the ultimate sin. So John grew up desperate to prove that he wasn't the sissy that his father claimed he was. He was kind of a chubby, indoor kid, and he suffered from a heart condition that made him faint a lot, so he was discouraged from participating in sports, which pissed his father off even more. John's dad actually accused him of faking this condition. He was just a mama's boy who would probably grow up queer. His words, not mine. So when young John wasn't dodging insults, he was pretending to be the guy his father demanded. A people pleaser with something to prove. He joined clubs, he volunteered, he tried anything that might earn a shred of approval, and it just didn't work. So he learned how to charm, to overcompensate, to say the right thing at the right time. But beneath all that charm was a festering anger, an invisible pressure cooker just waiting for an outlet. By the early 1960s, the now 18-year-old John tried the classic American fix-it plan. Move away, reinvent yourself. So he headed to Las Vegas for a bit, and he worked at a mortuary, of all places. So John first started out as an attendant. He would observe the morticians embalming the bodies, and he would sometimes be a pallbearer for funeral services. He actually lived on site. He slept on a cot in a room behind the embalming area, and he later confessed to having a moment. I'm doing a lot of air quotes today. A moment while alone at work where he climbed into a coffin and snuggled up to a dead body.
Girl, it was rigor mortis.
The body was a teenage male, and John essentially hugged up on this body, caressing it. I mean, whatever line separates weird curiosity from this man is unwell, he crossed it. Did he do anything else to that body? We don't know, but probably. Well, after a time, he decided to return to Chicago, and he enrolled at the Northwestern Business School and started playing the part of an ambitious young salesman. He graduated in 1963, and he quickly advanced to a management role at a local shoe company. And that is where he met Marilyn Myers, the daughter of a wealthy businessman who happened to own a string of KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. Well, John and Marilyn married in 1964, and his new father-in-law handed him the keys to the Chicken Kingdom. John became the manager of the restaurants in Waterloo, and they moved from Chicago into Marilyn's parents' former home in Waterloo. It was a really sweet gig. You know, the salary was excellent, and they got a cut of the restaurant's profits. I mean, to the neighbors, and more importantly, to John's impossible father, he was thriving. He and Marilyn had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. How perfect. He was a homeowner, businessman, community booster. He joined the Waterloo JCs, where local movers and shakers gathered to better the town and, maybe swap a little gossip and bourbon on the side. Gacy rose up fast within their ranks, charming everyone with his bottomless enthusiasm and endless need to be liked.
I have to be liked.
But beneath that friendly handshake and that KFC grin, darker habits began to form. John opened a club of sorts in their family home's basement where the KFC employees could hang out, play pool, and drink a little alcohol. And specifically the male employees. He didn't care about the girls. And obviously, most of these employees were quite young, 16, 17, 18 years old. And John was married to a woman, yes, but privately he was very much into men, especially younger men. I mean, at this time, John was in his early to mid-20s, but still, it was a creepy time bomb. So he would ply these guys with alcohol and porno, and then he would make a move, come on to them. He told them that essentially they needed to practice with men before moving on to women, or whatever cockamamie story he would come up with.
That's not how any of this works.
I read someplace that he had convinced some people that he was running some kind of homosexual experiments, and he would even pay them money. Well, if any of these young men would refuse his advances, he would play it off like he was just joking or testing their morals. But he was successful with these abuses. It's grooming. It's gross is what it is. And John was pretty busy doing whatever he wanted to these boys. Well, in 1968, one of these young men, 15-year-old Donald Voorhees Jr., reported John to the police for sexual assault. Now, John was a friend of this young man's father, Donald Sr. They were in the JCs together, and Donald Sr. was fucking pissed. But John twisted the narrative in his defense, saying that Donald was just jealous of him because he was about to become president of their JC's chapter. And this really divided their friend group, right? Some supported John, some sided with Donald. Well, John even bribed one of his other KFC employees to intimidate Donald Jr. to scare him off of testifying against him in court, but it didn't work. And this bronzer is very dark. John actually ended up getting arrested for that little stunt, the bribing for the intimidation. He also ended up entering a plea agreement for that assault on Donald Jr. He pled guilty to 1 count of sodomy and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, despite being a well-liked model prisoner, and he continued to serve in the JCs as an inmate, working on improving prison conditions, his wife filed for divorce when he was on the inside, and she took the kids and moved on with life. Honestly, I'm amazed that he went to prison at all. It's really no surprise to me that he did not serve his full sentence, and in fact, he was released on parole after serving less than 2 years. Oh yeah, after 18 months, John Gacy was released on good behavior. Good behavior! Translation, he played nice long enough to fool the guards. This was a skill he had been practicing since childhood. So when he walked out of that prison in 1970, he was getting close to 30. He was divorced, disgraced, but determined to rewrite his story. And not as a better man, but as a better liar. And because in 1970, it was much easier to keep secrets, especially huge secrets like felony convictions and prison time, John tucked tail and he scurried away from Iowa right back to Chicago. He told his friends that he had been framed, this whole political JC's jealousy story. He convinced his family that, he was the victim in all of this. Well, basically he charmed his way right back into polite society. Now, John's father had actually passed away while he was still in prison, so he moved back home with his mother for a time. He started his own business, because if you can't rebuild your reputation, you just rebrand it. So with the financial backing of his dear old mom, John bought a ranch-style home on the north side of Chicago, 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. He also launched his own handyman business, PDM Contractors Incorporated. PDM stands for Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. He hired young men for temporary labor jobs, painting, digging, hauling. He always paid in cash, and he was always offering opportunities to those down on their luck. Nobody was asking questions. In fact, most people thought he was doing something good. And within a year or two, the now 30-year-old John Wayne Gacy was remarried, this time to an old high school girlfriend, Carol Hoff. The marriage actually was relatively short-lived because John was way more interested in spending his time with, teenage boys. So he and Carol ended up divorcing by 1976. Okay, so meanwhile, John had become the neighborhood everyman. He joined the local moose lodge, he attended church picnics, he volunteered for civic events, he was active in local politics, he organized parades, he hosted barbecues, he was everywhere. If there was a room full of people, John Gacy wanted to be the loudest one in it. He wanted to be seen as successful, generous, important, just desperate to be liked. You know the kind.
I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
Then came the next phase of his life, the clown. In 1975, John Wayne Gacy volunteered for a clown club called the Jolly Jokers. Yeah, that was a real thing. He created 2 characters. There was Pogo the Clown, who was the cheerful one, and Patches the Clown, who was, not so cheerful. He would perform at hospitals and charity events and children's parties, painting that wide red grin that would later make national headlines for all the wrong reasons. This clown makeup is next level creepy. What in the discount Bozo the Clown nightmare fuel is this?
Grand prize!
Anyway, apparently the town loved it, and John's double life had reached expert level. By day, he was this reliable contractor who helped neighbors and he donated his time to local causes. By night, he was something else entirely, drinking heavily, sleeping less, becoming more and more volatile. And people noticed his temper, the odd hours that he kept, and the smell coming from his house. He was up all hours of the night, digging trenches, pouring concrete, hauling things into his garage late at night. But he was a contractor, and that's what contractors do. At least that's what they told themselves. When one of his employees mentioned this crawl space beneath his house, John joked that he was expanding it, whatever that means. So if anybody thought this was weird, they didn't say it out loud. Most people don't want to assume the worst. The smell was a plumbing issue. The late nights were work deadlines. And, in the 70s, people tended to take explanations at face value, especially if the person giving them was wearing a clown suit.
Nothing to see here.
John's charm and community presence gave him protection. He was the kind of man that everybody thought they knew. And when someone's that visible, it's easy to assume that they couldn't possibly be hiding anything. And that assumption is exactly what allowed him to keep operating in plain sight. John's business actually became his hunting ground. Most of his employees were young men, many of them struggling to get by, coming from vulnerable situations, broken homes, or, trying to get their feet underneath them after leaving school or the military. He deliberately hired people who needed money fast and they didn't have anybody keeping close tabs on them. He called himself a mentor. Unfortunately, this kind of situation is all too common with predators. They know exactly who to target. Somebody who is young enough to trust him, but old enough to be ignored by the system and desperate enough to say yes to anything. So John would offer these young men, rides home or small jobs, a few drinks to celebrate after a long day's work. He would charm them, flatter them, and make them feel seen, which is something that not a lot of them are used to. That's how control works. It doesn't always start with fear. It starts with a smile and a handshake. So by 1977, a few of the young men who had worked for John had gone missing. Now, some of them had been reported missing by some friends or family, but nothing was really connected. And remember, this is early law enforcement technology, so there's different jurisdictions, there's no digital file sharing, nothing's immediate. And around this time, remember, this is post-Vietnam War, right around that time, but running away was not uncommon. Many people assumed that these young men were just, moving on, maybe finding jobs or chasing a girl someplace. And John, ever the charmer, played along with these assumptions, offering sympathy to the families. He'd say things like, well, it's terrible. I hope they find him soon. Meanwhile, the people they were looking for were buried under his house.
Sorry, what?
So as early as 1972, but the majority of this occurred between 76 and 78, John Wayne Gacy had systematically lured at least 30 vulnerable young men back into his home. The majority of these young men were underage. He would ply them with booze and porno. He would trick them into putting on handcuffs. He would assault them and torture them in unspeakable ways. Use your imagination, but putting out cigars on places, putting things in places. Then he would strangle them to death with a rope because it was clean. Then he would bury them in the crawl space under his house. And when he ran out of room in the crawl space, he buried some of them in the backyard or under the floor in his garage. And then he started disposing of victims elsewhere, like the Des Plaines River. Fast forward to the evening of December 11th, 1978. 36-year-old John Wayne Gacy visited the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, to discuss a remodeling deal with the owner. 15-year-old pharmacy employee Robert Peast was working that night at the pharmacy, and he overheard the discussion. John had mentioned that his company often hired teenagers for the jobs, and he paid them very well. Later, when Robert's mother came to pick him up for the night, he told her, "Hang on just a second, I need to go talk to this contractor about a potential job opportunity that paid good money." He left the store at about 9 p.m. and said he'd be back soon, but Robert never came home. Now, it's important to note that Robert was a good kid. Definitely not John's typical type. He wasn't vulnerable. He wasn't, troubled. He wasn't any of those things. He was an excellent student. He was a hard worker, had a stable home. He didn't get into trouble. He wasn't somebody who was going to slip through the cracks. His mother called the police to report him missing. She gave him the name Gacy because Robert had mentioned it before he disappeared. And that detail changed everything. So police detective Joseph Kozenzak and his team at the Des Plaines Police Department took the lead. They ran a background check and quickly realized that John Wayne Gacy wasn't just some random contractor. He was a convicted sex offender in the state of Iowa. Red flag doesn't even cover it. It was a red billboard with flashing lights and a foghorn. So police went to John's home and interviewed him the next day. And Gacy, being Gacy, talked their ears off, offering to assist in the search for the missing boy. You know, classic manipulation tactic. If you act like part of the solution, no one will suspect that you are the problem. He flatly denied offering work or a job to Robert, and he'd only been at the pharmacy late in the evening because he went back to retrieve his appointment book that he had left there earlier. Okay, Kozenzak wasn't buying it, and he got a search warrant. So on December 13th, investigators searched Gacy's house for the first time, convinced that Robert was being held there against his will. They didn't find him, but they did find a treasure chest of weirdness. It included several police badges, syringes, handcuffs, child sexual abuse material, clothing too small to fit Gacy, like underwear and things, several IDs, like driver's licenses that did not belong to him, and a blue winter coat, like a parka, with a receipt in the pocket from the Nissan pharmacy, and a length of nylon rope, and that smell in the air.
Brother, ugh.
He said it was, bad plumbing or like a sewer drain situation. And everybody left uneasy, but with no direct evidence of Robert's disappearance, they couldn't make an arrest. So the detectives decided to play the long game. While they were continuing to investigate and interview people, associates, and people around in John Wayne Gacy's orbit, they also put him under 24-hour surveillance because of that sex offender connection. Officers followed him everywhere. Restaurants, bars, even late-night errands. And the longer they followed him, the more he unraveled. It's almost like he was testing them, you know what I mean? Like, he would drive like a maniac because he knew that they wouldn't do anything about it. And he started to, try to befriend the surveillance team. He would buy them breakfast, he would chat them up, he would even lightly complain that they were harassing him. He invited them into his house for drinks. As the week went on, John got sloppy, he was unraveling. He would swing back and forth between bragging about being important and then complaining about being set up. And then he started confessing partial truths to friends, things like clowns can get away with murder. Not exactly the line that you want to throw out when you're already under investigation. On December 18th, investigators were able to tie the receipt that was found in the pocket of the parka to a 17-year-old co-worker of Robert's at the pharmacy. She said she had borrowed his parka that day, and she remembers putting the receipt in the pocket before she returned the coat to him. By December 20th, police had enough new evidence to secure a second search warrant of John's home, so they returned to it the next day. This time, they opened the crawl space and dug deeper, literally, and unearthed human remains. Now, John was not home when all of this happened. He had actually driven to his lawyer's office to discuss the progress of a harassment suit that he was filing against the police. But in a moment of manic exhaustion, he began confessing, telling his lawyer that he had been burying things for years. But that little confession wasn't what actually took him down. After John left his lawyer's office, remember he's still under surveillance, he drove to a gas station and he handed a small baggie of weed to the attendant. Then John left to go meet up with some other friends before he went to the cemetery to go see where his father was buried. It very much seemed to the police that John was on a farewell tour of sorts. It looked like he was preparing to pull the plug on himself. You get what I'm saying? So the police intercepted John while he was out and about. They pulled him out of the car and arrested him for possession of marijuana. Meanwhile, the police were at John's house where they had discovered the remains of 29 separate victims. Once John accepted that he wasn't going to be able to bullshit his way out of it, he began to cooperate. He confessed in detail to murdering approximately 30 young men, though he couldn't remember all of their names, but he drew up a diagram of where the bodies were buried. He also confessed to luring Robert Peast to his home and strangling him on the night of December 11th, though he said that Robert was not buried at his house. He said that he slept next to Robert's dead body before he drove out to the Des Plaines River the next day before sunup to dump it. For days, reporters and police swarmed the house. house. Neighbors stood in disbelief, and the same people who'd eaten at his barbecues now stared at his home as officers carried out bags of evidence, body after body. The block of Summerdale Avenue in front of John's house went from a quiet street into a crime scene etched in history. In the interrogation room, John switched between arrogance and denial. He insisted that he was just misunderstood. He blamed stress and he claimed multiple personalities. He even tried to say that others had done it while he was blacked out. Okay, John, classic narcissist logic, everything but responsibility. He was officially charged with 33 counts of murder on December 22nd, 1978. It was one of the largest single indictments in U.S. history. The media dubbed him the Killer Clown, and even in a country that had already seen Ted Bundy and Son of Sam, this was a new level of nightmare fuel. I think we need to do something clownish. Do we need to add a clown touch? When the trial began in February of 1980, John Gacy treated it like another clown gig. He smirked his way through the testimony, he corrected witnesses, he doodled on his notepad, he whispered jokes to his lawyers. He claimed that he suffered from multiple personality disorder, arguing that Pogo the Clown and other alter egos had been the ones to commit the murders, not John Wayne Gacy. The prosecution, led by the state's attorney William Kunkel, didn't buy it for a second. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that Gacy wasn't insane, he was just cruel, calculating. He'd planned everything. He had equipment. He had pre-staged some of those graves in the crawl space. He tricked them with those handcuffs. He covered his tracks, and then when he couldn't bury his crimes anymore, he just tried to bury the truth. Over the course of the next 5 weeks, the courtroom heard the most haunting, gruesome evidence imaginable. But the tone was different now. It had shifted away from fear of this clown and the crawl space and the putrefied skeletons and the murders. This was about realizing that this man had existed undetected for years, protected by charm and politeness. That's what terrified the people the most, how normal he looked.
I said to the jury, well, if you want to show mercy, and then I just stopped in mid-sentence. I turned around and I walked over to the victim board, and real slow, I ripped each photo off the board with a loud snap. It took my time about 2 minutes to get all 22 off in my hand, and I walked back in front of the jury box right in their faces, and I said, look, if you want to show this man mercy, you show him the same mercy he showed when he took these 22 lives off the face of the earth and put them here. And I just threw them in the crawl space opening, walked away. I left a couple of minutes of pin drop silence in the courtroom.
On March 12th of 1980, after deliberating for just under 2 hours, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. He was also sentenced to death by lethal injection. When the judge delivered that sentence, Gacy barely reacted. But anyways, he spent the next 14 years on death row at Menard Correctional Center and somehow, even in prison, managed to stay insufferably on brand.
And there are a lot of things I can't remember. If you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them. None of them never worked for me. None of them... They never went to any places that I ever hung around because I didn't hang around that many places unless you were involved in politics or if you were involved in clowning, then I might have ran into you.
He became a self-proclaimed artiste. He painted portraits of Jesus, Elvis, skulls, birds, and clowns. He often painted portraits of himself as Pogo, and he sold them to collectors. He profited off of his own infamy, and he continued giving interviews and submitting for appeals, though he wasn't successful. I've actually seen an exhibition that had one of those paintings and the actual clown suits. There's like 2 different versions of the Pogo the Clown suit. The vibes are bad, y'all. 10 out of 10, do not recommend. Anyway, families of the victims endured years of appeals, retrials, and media coverage that turned Gacy into a celebrity. He loved the attention and he wanted to be remembered, even if it meant being remembered for something evil. But on May 10th, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was put to death by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center. Thousands of people gathered outside the prison and at the Chicago City Hall area. They released balloons and celebrated the occasion. His last meal, you ask? A bucket of KFC, of course, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. He received last rites from a Catholic priest, and before the injection was administered, he was asked if he had any final words, and he said, "Kiss my ass." How's hell, John? It's hot down there, huh? After his execution, his brain was removed for psychological study because scientists wanted to see if there was something physically different about it. Spoiler, there ain't. Okay, turns out evil doesn't show up on a brain scan. The house in Chicago on Summerdale Avenue was demolished and the lot remained empty for years, too haunted for buyers, too infamous to forget. But the impact of what he had done didn't disappear with him. It changed how police departments handled missing person reports, it pushed forensic science forward, and it made everybody question what a normal neighbor really looks like. And that is the story of John Wayne Gacy. Okay, alright, well I did a little clown light today, a little clown glamoo. Anyways, all the makeup that I used in today's look is listed down in the description box if you're interested. Also down there is a link to a Google Doc if you want to recommend a Crue Trime story to me. It'll take you to it. You can fill in all the dirty details. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Okay, what am I doing? What am I doing? I don't know. Yours. Hang on, I need some blush. I don't have the right colors over here. Chicago, Illinois. It's not funny. Today's story, hello? Exactly, Debbie. He had Bree Doug.